Plants vs. Zombies is not only iconic and a treasured game for millions, including me, having still fond memories of even the first title from my childhood, but it was also at one point one of the most successful game franchises of all time, having games that were routinely at the top 5 in the App Store and even had a successful spin-off third-person shooter series that stood to compete with games like Battlefields and Call of Duty during its release. But there's something about the plot of the game and its references that I've always questioned, even since I played the very first iteration, and that is the very single small background character that most probably didn't even think twice about when they first saw him, and that is Stinky from Zen Garden, a snail who comes from a previous title from Popcap, Insaniquarium, as the first pet you unlock. Now, it's not unheard of to have references to other games you've worked on, including another direct reference to many games being Zomboss, but a direct physical character that exists in the same universe? Then I started noticing other possible links. Why are there so many references to pirates and Dr. Zomboss's forces? Why are there so many maps of Garden Warfare that are water-themed? Why are there so many aquatic variants of zombie forces? Why do the zombies own so many aquariums? Why is Zomboss creating zombie and skeleton fish variants? Where did Zomboss even become so intelligent? And what happened to Meryl the Mermaid from Insaniquarium? I've got a lot to say for this one, and I might draw a pretty interesting conclusion this time around. This is the Stinky theory. But first, before we begin, I want to say that this is my second time doing a theory outside of the game I was originally known for, and that in regards to the first time I did with the Class of '09 theory, you guys actually really turned out for it, and I'm super thankful. Furthermore, after watching a few other videos of the YouTuber who started the Plants vs. Zombies 2 challenges, Shagrots Gave, I actually noticed that he made a call to action in regards to the somewhat lacking variety of Plants vs. Zombies theories.
I've got to say, I am a little bit disappointed. I was really hoping for something big, something that ran deep. All of these were either just memes or a bit too shallow for my liking. So I'm going to end this video on a call to action. I know I have some staggeringly creative people out there in my audience, and I want you guys to go out there and replay the games and find me a real Plants vs. Zombies conspiracy theory. Go out there and find me a lead.
And with me having always been curious about Stinky and the linking of these two in-game universes, and that I now have theory experience, I decided to take the case. But with that being said, theories are really fun to make, but they're also really hard and take a long time to make as well, so please consider supporting me, whether that be sharing or hyping the video, whatever that is, becoming a channel member or Patreon subscriber, or just subscribing to my channel with notifications, as I do want to keep making these theories, and from what I've seen, a lot of you are interested in them too. But with that being said, I will now begin the theory. Now, first off, I need to explain some things. We all know Plants vs. Zombies. It's a simple game with the plot that zombies are attempting to take over and eat your brains, and you have to stop them with a field of sentient plants, fungi, protists, and even some rocks. It was released in 2009, and since then it had an entire series grow around it, adding to the lore and rules of the universe in Plants vs. Zombies. And several years before the release of Plants vs. Zombies, their previous title was Insaniquarium Deluxe, an equally simple game about feeding fish and collecting money to buy pets. And on the surface, Plants vs. Zombies is pretty out loud about its predecessor's existence, as it even has a minigame, Zomboss, giving exact reference to it in the original. Even more so, Plants vs. Zombies was originally supposed to be a sequel to Insaniquarium, and at that, it would be totally normal that there would be some level of reference to its predecessor in Plants vs. Zombies via the minigame. And before we go any further, we now have to ask ourselves the question, is there really anything even here to theorize about? I mean, Plants vs. Zombies, especially when it comes to Garden Warfare, is a massive hub when it comes to pop culture references, including other previous games worked on by Popcap like Bejeweled, or other games in general like Mass Effect, who also saw variant characters like the Imp, Bookworm Adventures references, the Cheetos having 2 variant characters, and what really took me off guard was Noam Chomsky of all things, from Left 4 Dead 2, Half-Life 2, Dying Light, Dead by Daylight, and other games I lied about him being in, like Don't Starve and Project Zomboid. But the point is, if all these games have rich pop culture references, how is Insaniquarium any different? Well, we could say all of these things are just real and in the universe too, but I think the more logical example is that these other references are just props and brands like they would be in real life. For instance, we can appropriately assume the Chester Chomper and Cheeto scientists are both just promotional stunts, or maybe they're just fans of the products. This can be very easily just explained as a costume thing for the Imp, as well as the Normandy on the train being a prop or scale model for Mass Effect fans, as it likely exists in the Plants vs. Zombies universe as a video game. Since gnomes in Garden Warfare 2 aren't typically solid gold, it is likely that the bookstore is more of a reference to him rather than being actually owned by him. The point is, most of these other game references have some level of explanation for their existence in Plants vs. Zombies. However, the ones that seem to stick out are the gems that we can find in the game Bejeweled and Stinky from the original Insaniquarium. I could say the gems are just props too, but unlike the Normandy, they look like they were actually mined and excavated. And Stinky, unless it was just another snail that was identically named Stinky, he has no other explanation for being here other than being a sentient snail who collects coins. And thus, that's where our investigation will begin, with the simple question of whether or not Popcap games exist in the same universe. Now, the Plants vs. Zombies universe is definitely what I think most people would call whimsical, with things like time travel, sentient animals, sentient plants, zombies in general, and logically incorrect science. If I'm to trust the wiki as well as other YouTubers, the zombies exist in this universe as a race that existed along humanity and were likely invoked into existence due to a time paradox of a single hyper-intelligent zombie, Dr. Zomboss, going back in time creating the first zombie, which in turn became his own ancestors, as their descendants would go on to create him. This is all due to a spiteful rivalry that Dr. Zomboss had with Crazy Dave decades before the modern day, due to Dave winning a science fair over Zomboss. Over time, the conflict escalated, which culminated into the Garden Warfare games, where it became more of an active war zone with both sides heavily mobilizing. Now, I know that was probably a lot to take in at once, but fortunately only a small part of it are relevant to the theory starting out. So far, what's important to know is that this is a very wacky and whimsical world where a lot is possible. So knowing this, can we use context clues and evidence that we find in Plants vs. Zombies to prove that games like Bejeweled and Insaniquarium exist in the same world? And I'll start with the seemingly easier one on the surface at least, and that is Bejeweled. Now, from what I understand, there is some lore surrounding the later titles in Bejeweled that involves space travel and exploring the stars and using the gems to travel or something, but for now, we don't need to concern ourselves with too much of that. All we need to reference is the original Bejeweled, and that it in the beginning was just called Diamond Mine. And it pretty much had no other lore than it was just a mine with various precious gems inside, though making the diamond the most prominent one out of all of them, as it is the largest one on the title screen. And we can pretty quickly assume that these are the same bonus diamonds that are used as special currency in the various PvZ games, as they are also often referred to as gems and diamonds interchangeably, and thus it would be normal to see a cart filled with these various gems, as these gems are likely very valuable. Okay, that's the easy part done. What about Insaniquarium? Can we prove it just as easily? Well, no, because Insaniquarium does have a much more detailed world, and even though Stinky exists, that could still be a one-off, as keep in mind, Stinky only shows up prominently in the first Plants vs. Zombies, and never has a more significant appearance. So, naturally, that means I'm on the ground to look for clues. And starting out, it wasn't going well initially. As a matter of fact, it originally felt like I was getting clues for any Popcap game other than Insaniquarium, with multiple Bookworm Adventures references in Garden Warfare 2, Plants vs. Zombies 1, and even a Dead Space reference flyer too. But this might be important later. Then at the Aqua Center, I saw it. Not even in the fish tanks either, but on the street on the other side of the fence. Speedy Snail Moving Company. Now, it is a car, so it could have been driven by a person, or even a plant or zombie for that matter. However, we already know that there are sentient animals in the Plants vs. Zombies universe, as is with the goats in Zomburgers. But Zomboss likely had something to do with that, increasing their intellect or something. So, how could it possibly be the same for snails? Unless it was already pre-established in the lore that there were intelligent snails. And what do we know from Stinky? That he is an intelligent snail, capable of standard banker work and collecting and managing currency and other capital-related jobs. And keep in mind, this isn't the only instance of the Speedy Snail Moving Company. There are other cars from this very same moving company, usually on the plant side of the war-torn maps, implying that the Snail Moving Company is helping people and potentially plants to move in the state of the conflict. And even more so, in Insaniquarium, after you beat the main campaign and move on to Challenge Tank, your reward for completing each tank is a backstory for each of the pets, and the aliens too. And Stinky's story, which also happens to be the first one you unlock, is that it openly acknowledges that he was different from the other snails with his obsession with money. And why does he do it? He says it impresses the ladies. Now, whether there is another meaning off that, or that literally is his only reason to be determined to make money, but it very clearly sets an intentional world-building narrative in regards to animals, and specifically the character Stinky being a snail who is great with money. He was even included in the Crazy Dave music video Wabby Waboo, featuring a golden shell. But with that being said, and the fact that a lot of the pet bios feel very similar in tone to that of the tone of plant bios in Plants vs. Zombies Almanac, that's enough for me to come to the conclusion that, likely yes, Insaniquarium and Plants vs. Zombies do take place in the same universe. So, what does this mean in regards to the Popcap universe, other than Stinky is possibly an intertidal or Syrian species of snail, and that there's an extremely bizarre conflict that happens when in regards to aquarium tanks? No, I mean, what happened? What happened in the years between Insaniquarium's conclusion and the events that started Plants vs. Zombies? Why did Stinky move and get a new job? Well, that's where we get our next lead. In each of the fish tanks, and more importantly, under the sea of Insaniquarium. Now, I've given a base statement of the gameplay of Insaniquarium, and how it feels like just an aquarium simulator, but I haven't actually talked about the lore of the game because, well, it's kind of all over the place. First off, you're feeding guppies and they just randomly produce tangible money, and these guppies, if we were to compare their actual sizes to characters like Meryl the Mermaid or Gash the Shark, are completely massive. Every single pet, once again including Meryl the Mermaid, are all found using these eggs that are hatched using money at the end of every level. Throughout pretty much the entire game, a strange faction of monsters, only designated as aliens, consistently come to your aquarium to eat or just straight up murder all your fish. And lastly, the entire game takes place inside just a bunch of fish tanks, but as we can see based on both the main menu and Meryl the Mermaid's shop, that the game very clearly takes place, or at least has points, at the bottom of the sea. So, what the heck is going on? Well, let's start off with the easy stuff. Guppies and other fish dropping coins is as simply explained as it is for marigolds in the original Plants vs. Zombies, and that's whether they are randomly just finding or producing coins, or paying you for taking care of them, are pretty equally presentable, as that's just how this game's universe works. As for the guppy and other fish sizes, it could be changed character size for the sake of gameplay, but we also have pea shooters and sunflowers, who are comparatively close to the same size as a human. So I simply see this as a practical thing that can happen in this universe. As for the eggs, this gives me probably the most trouble, as it doesn't make complete sense as you are buying 3 pieces of an egg, which makes me believe that the egg itself isn't actually real. And furthermore, if we are looking through the bios of all the pets and interpreting them as fact, this clearly isn't their birthplaces either. Thus, I think the eggs are more likely cages of some kind, and paying for them is potentially buying their bail? Possibly, but we might need to revisit this one. Now, as for where Insaniquarium takes place, this is the kind of hard part, because the eggs, at least for now, I can't have a 100% definitive answer backed up, and I have to do a bit of assuming, but I do have an answer, and I believe the game does actually take place underwater. So, starting off, let's assume that it takes place on land. The biggest indication that it takes place on land would be the aquarium itself, and the fish are all initially bought by you. And even though the fish may be comically large, these massive aquariums do exist in the real world, and they can even be seen in Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare maps. However, that's where it ends. As for it taking place under the sea, at least in part, I think these aquariums are real and aren't a metaphor or anything, but I feel as though they are still located in the ocean itself, in a sort of undersea aquarium. Reason being, it just doesn't make sense that the player would just have ready access to Meryl to purchase fish from her and have her help out in the aquariums. Furthermore, look at the HUD and notice how it looks like a form of reinforced submarine or heavy scuba suits. To me, it looks like one of those old school scuba diving dresses. Thus, I think the player is down in this undersea aquarium area to help monitor and maintain aquariums, either to make money or to just assist the fish. And the fish themselves likely also willingly choose to live in these tanks, as the rest of the sea is probably extremely dangerous for them, which would actually be accurate in regards to the actual ocean too. So that's the location set. Now, what about the aliens faction? And I'm going to be perfectly honest, this was kind of disappointing for me to learn. But it seems like the vast majority of the aliens aren't actually even aliens at all. Sure, the first two are a reference to Xenomorph and Predator. Yeah, I like how this Sylvester guy rolls. But as it turns out, a lot of these aliens didn't even appear to come from space, at least not from space straight to the aquariums. Sylvester owned a sushi bar before a suspicious wormhole allowed him to teleport to aquariums. Gus and Balrog have both likely been living among the world of people for years now. The Destructor robot was originally created as a toy for a nephew of a scientist. That's somewhat coincidental. And Ulysses, Psycho Squid, and Bilateris all have pretty useless bios in regards to the theory. But then we get to the final boss of the game, Cyrax, and his corresponding method of attack spawning mini Sylvesters. Starting with Cyrax himself, once again his entire bio is completely useless, except maybe the inclusion that Tank 5 was apparently a very large and serious battle in this game's universe, and it would make some sense too if it's actually attempting to preserve fish under the sea. Now as for the mini Sylvesters, they actually give significantly more information and context with the fact that they were direct creations by Cyrax, and furthermore that they weren't even his first mini creations, as he originally had created spawns of himself, but had to do with something else as they were far more rebellious than the Sylvesters. Remember this detail, it'll be important later. So Cyrax has the ability to create mini Sylvesters, and they largely obey him. So, what are the chances that he created regular Sylvester as well as all the other aliens, save for maybe Destructor? That he likely allowed them to just pursue normal lives on the surface until the time came for him to attack, and when he did, he opened mysterious portals near every single one of them for attacks, causing them to activate like sleeper cells. And just like that, it all of a sudden makes sense why none of the aliens' bios have anything to do with outer space. It's because all of them were born on Earth, except for maybe Cyrax. This whole character, Cyrax, is shrouded in mystery. Why is he doing this? Could he really just be as simply motivated to do all of this just for food? Eerily similar to another enemy we know. There is clearly more to this character's story, and I'm gonna figure it out. But as for now, we have the general storyline of Insaniquarium down. Insaniquarium is a series of fish tanks that exist far under the sea in a sort of scuba aquarium fish lab. The lab appears to be taking care of and providing safety to various fish across different biomes, and also happen to be working closely with a mermaid by the name of Meryl, and a series of intelligent, sophisticated aquatic organisms that all just go under the name of pets. These tanks are frequently attacked by creatures, teleporting inside referred to as aliens, and many of the intelligent aquatic pets have a bit of a history with these aliens. These tank skirmishes continued onwards as more and more intelligent pets came along, until it eventually culminated in the final fight with the boss of the aliens as well as all the pets, ending in a fish victory and alien defeat. Afterwards, the alien boss Cyrax apparently hung up the towel and went on to more passive endeavors, whereas the fish and their friends likely went on to go rebuild their homes. So, what happened after that? If the game release dates are the actual time periods, only 5 years later, zombies attacked the entire surface world, and Stinky just so happened to also be the snail collecting money on behalf of the homeowner, neighbor of Crazy Dave's, during probably the most important conflict of the first Plants vs. Zombies war. Furthermore, this might be a stretch, but I can't help but point out the obnoxiously large and exposed brain Cyrax has, and the only other thing that zombies care about being eating that exact thing. So, let's talk about what happened after the Insaniquarium War. We enter into the sequel of Insaniquarium, Plants vs. Zombies, with virtually no explanation. We randomly gain access to the plant the Pea Shooter, along with the Sunflower from a company called Bloom and Doom Seed Co., a very mysterious organization who we don't really know too much about. And after several days, we meet our next door neighbor, Crazy Dave. Our first introduction is that he announces that you will go bowling and offers you a walnut to do so. This is far from the only interaction, as he continuously shows up throughout the game, including halfway through the pool section where you find his car keys, and then he becomes the in-game shop vendor, very similar to Meryl's role in Insaniquarium. And that's when we meet our very first pet again, this time on the top side, Stinky the Snail. His role this time is virtually identical to his role in the previous game, to pick up money on your behalf. But this time, he's in a much less combat zone type role, residing in the Zen Garden, a peaceful location where nothing can harm him or your plants, and does appear to have consistent locations, with it being both similar to Tank 3 in Insaniquarium, and there being a garden warfare map of Zen as well. You just go there, he collects any money your plants drop for you, and if you give him chocolate bars, he not only collects the money faster, but he will collect money from them even after you've left the Zen Garden. And all in all, Stinky is just a very diligent worker, being more than worth the money you have to pay for him, and overall a positive addition to the plant side. So, why is he here now? It could be that Stinky may have just ended up being out of a job after the Battle of Tank 5, since after the end, the alien horde supposedly ended up stopping their attacks, with even the leader of the aliens going on to start a talk show, and someone as well known as Crazy Dave likely got Stinky's resume and posted his contract as one of the items in his shop, Twitty Dinkies. And if nothing else was referenced after that, I think it would be safe to say that maybe everything did just go smoothly for the aquariums of fish from here on out, and Stinky was literally just looking for a new job. I mean, all 4 of the aquatic plants don't have anything to say about fish or the ocean, with Sea Shroom claiming that they haven't even seen it before, but as I've already given away, there's more to it than that. The minigame Zomboss is exactly what it sounds like, a quick gimmick of Insaniquarium where you are feeding snorkel zombies with brains instead of fish with pellets. Additionally, it's worth noting that this is the only minigame other than iZombie where you play as the zombies. I mean, certainly they could have put sea shrooms or even tangle kelp in here instead. Now, I don't think that this minigame actually happened, as well as a lot of minigames, but I do think this exists, intentionally as a metaphor for what might have possibly happened after the events of Insaniquarium. And this isn't all we can get out of this either, as I referenced the Zen Garden earlier and how that's where Stinky resides, but in the original Plants vs. Zombies, there's 3 whole Zen Gardens. You get the original Zen Garden by default, but you can purchase the other 2 from Dave, being both a nighttime garden for mushrooms and an aquatic garden for your aquatic plants. And as you guessed, it's the exact same aquarium from Zomboss. And looking closer at it, you'll quickly start to notice that it looks a lot like another aquarium as well, Tank 1. It does look a bit different, both in color and on account that the tombstones inside, but with that diver helmet with some alterations, and Nico's rock in the exact same shape, this is very clearly intentioned to be a reference to the original Tank 1. But what if I told you that this isn't just a reference to the original Tank 1, and is instead the exact same one we defended in Insaniquarium, but renovated by the zombies? So, we do recognize that plants and zombies are at a consistent conflict with each other. However, there are also points where the zombies and plants are passive with each other, if only temporarily. Along with the fact that zombies and plants both largely use the same currency, even including the other minigame where you play as zombies, being iZombie, where Crazy Dave explains that he was willing to help out the zombies practice invading lawns as long as no plants were harmed. Which I do actually think happened, because why else would Crazy Dave jump in to explain this one? Anyways, I reference all of this because Dave and the plants, as well as the other factions, have likely done business with zombies in the past, buying and selling items to each other. My guess is Zomboss obtained the aquarium himself at some point, and then sold the aquarium to Crazy Dave, allowing him to resell the aquarium to you. Reason being why I think Zomboss owned the aquarium is, even subtracting the whole Zomboquarium minigame metaphor, look at this tank compared to it in the original Insaniquarium. This tank has a green, slimy, almost sickly look to it, with even the helmet visor having this greenish reflection on it, whereas the original had this deep, fresh, clean blue look to it. And furthermore, this aquarium has 2 rest in peace tombstones rising out of the sand that were completely absent in the original. And yeah, the original Tank 4 has a human skeleton in it, and Tank 3 has a green hue too. However, tombstones are a complete hallmark of zombies and Plants vs. Zombies, aren't a super common aquarium decoration, and these aren't even present in the Mushroom Garden either, and neither of these were here in the original tank design, meaning this tank was very likely owned by the zombies. But with that being said, that gives a rather different implication for what might have happened after the events of Insaniquarium. And, well, there's a handful of different conclusions we can come to what might have happened to leave the zombies in possession of Tank 1. The zombies could have bought it. I mean, I could imagine Dr. Zomboss as a heckler, and as we would later learn, the zombies do have interest in aquatic environments. They could have simply found the tank after it was abandoned and simply made it their own, or they could have conquered it themselves. I think the zombies buying it, although possible, isn't very likely, as it's just usually not the zombies' playstyle to do that on the very beginning. Zombies are capable of bartering and playing defense, but they are pretty consistently the invaders more than any other role. They also could have found the tank abandoned, which I think is possible if the aliens broke their surrender and attacked the fish again, and this time they won. I don't think this is likely though, as pretty much all the aliens seem to have moved on after the initial events of Insaniquarium, with even the boss moving on to host a talk show. Even more so, this image of the talk show isn't even the full picture, and is a bit deceptive due to it being cut off in the cinematic. In the game's full JPEG of this picture, you can see that he is casting to an audience of fish, meaning clearly he was done murdering, or at least for the time being. Thus, I think it's most likely that the zombies invaded part of the ocean, namely the Insaniquarium facility, taking it for themselves. After all, the zombies do have entire pirate battalions, a clear interest in aquariums and the sea in general, entire zombie armies that come directly from the ocean, and it being established in lore as early as the first Plants vs. Zombies game that zombies do not need to breathe in order to survive. And there's one more small detail that makes this all the more likely. In Insaniquarium, there are a handful of Easter eggs you can access by typing on screen. For instance, if you're in a tank and you type space, the aquarium will take on a space effect. If you type in void, it looks as if all the fish were just transported to Squidward's alone dimension. If you type in wavy, the tank takes on a likewise appearance. And if you type in zombie, all the fish in the tank suddenly look dead. That is a strangely topical Easter egg. There's also another Easter egg that activates sandbox mode in Insaniquarium that has the following combination of up, up, down, down, left, right, BA. And listen to one of Dave's suggestions for Zomboss's weakness right before the final fight. Dude, I know this is just an Easter egg, but I swear, these two games are linked both ways. They have to be. But if this is true that the zombies invaded the Insaniquarium tanks, why? Yeah, the zombies clearly have an interest in the ocean and aquatic biomes, but why? Zombies do just invade for the sake of invasion, but I think it might actually have something to do with Cyrax. Remember how I mentioned that massive exposed brain he has, and how it also happens to be the most significant part of his whole design. Furthermore, in your first and only day in Tank 5, where you also get your first and only bout with Cyrax, you can see in the background 3 rows of teeth that seem more like they belong to a human than any fish we've seen, with a humanoid head in the back with what appears to be a very large brain. I know that Insaniquarium was before Plants vs. Zombies was even a thing, but that couldn't be a loose reference to Zomboss, could it? Therefore, with all of this, I'm led to believe that Cyrax was at one point on the same side as Zomboss. He might even be loosely related to them, given their similar head designs, but he likely either didn't keep his truce with the fish, or didn't keep his truce with the zombies, and then his brain was on the line. But at that, I think we can draw the following conclusions from what happened in the 5 years between Insaniquarium and Plants vs. Zombies 1. The fish did in fact win against the aliens, and they did likely go on to live peaceful coexistences with each other, though it was relatively short-lived, as after the ending of the legendary conflict in Tank 5 brought the attention of the zombies, a faction that was likely still on the rise in power compared to both the fish and the aliens at the time. Whether the aliens, mainly their leader Cyrax, was on the side of the zombies during the following invasion or takeover that took place, or he was the target of the attack due to he himself having a rather large brain, or if he even had loose affiliations with him beforehand is unknown. All that's known after the first Plants vs. Zombies is that it resulted with Tank 1 and likely all the other tanks too falling under the zombie control, and this is only up to the events of Plants vs. Zombies 1. There's still a lot of branching possibilities, and still a great deal of conflict and damages that further dogpiled onto both the aliens and the fish in Insaniquarium, and all can be observed in even later iterations of the Plants vs. Zombies games. Now, I've mentioned and maintained that zombies have an interest in the ocean, and as you'll soon find out that they still do, but Dr. Zomboss is a bit more ambitious than it seems, as he also appears to have an interest in space, which once again kind of works considering zombies canonically do not need to breathe. In other words, ignore the fact that one of these two places would end you anyways due to the lack of pressure, and the other would end you due to overwhelming pressure. He has a very clear and sizable space force. As a matter of fact, it's far beyond that of what Dave has, with imps calling in mechs, tech ships flying around through the skies on his side of the maps in Garden Warfare 2, and him having moon bases. And unlike the previous question, we have one definitive answer as to why Zomboss wants to explore space, or at least wants the moon, and that is so that he can mess up the alignment and cover up the sun so that plants can't reproduce as effectively, if at all. But Zomboss has quite a bit of aerial spacefaring vessels. Could it be that there's something else in space that the zombies are after? As stated before, Cyrax is likely the only alien in the Insaniquarium game who actually originated from space, and we know, based on his ending screen, that he is capable of surviving on land as well as in the water, leading me to believe that he doesn't need to breathe either, just like the zombies. Thus, it may be that he is able to survive in a vacuum environment without any modifications whatsoever. And if this is the case, that Cyrax's origins are that of space and that Dr. Zomboss is simultaneously sending forces into space, we can assume that there is more to Dr. Zomboss and Cyrax than meets the eye. But at this point, I'm out of leads and just shooting in the dark again. Thus we have to once again shift gears and talk about the ocean's aquariums and the zombies' interest in them. As stated earlier, Plants vs. Zombies wasn't the end of the Insaniquarium storyline. In Plants vs. Zombies 2, Pirate Seas have corresponding pirate zombies, and Big Wave Beach has zombies that outright emerge from the ocean, including a deep-sea gargantuar that looks quite fish-like himself. However, both of these events take place in the past, and likely wouldn't have any effect on the Insaniquarium storyline. Garden Warfare 1, we have almost nothing to go off of, other than shores capturing various fish and even dolphins, rather strangely, though that's probably where the dolphin guns come from, but I'm not really seeing anything too outlandish for a dock, as it's obviously normal to catch fish. But that's kind of a lie for me, as there is one thing in Garden Warfare 1 that I think is important, but first let's move on to Garden Warfare 2, and looking around, well, if it wasn't obvious the zombies were in control of at least their own variant of the aquarium business, if not all aquariums then, it definitely is now. Look at these aquariums. Large, high-tech fish tanks more than capable of holding both massive fish and aliens, and it appears Zomboss has even begun creating his own breeds of fish, being little zombie fish, people fish. There's plenty evidence here to suggest that the zombies have either won or at least have an even more extended foothold in whatever conflict they're fighting in the ocean in regards to the aquariums and sea. Reason being, the zombies have developed their own fish laser alien technology, and I think that could be a more clear reference to the alien fights in Insaniquarium. In all but one alien fight in Insaniquarium, you are to fight the battle with a laser gun, and in regards to Zomboss's own aquarium district, he is equipping fish as well as zombies with their own lasers. But because of this reason right here, with the lasers and that the zombies very clearly have an interest in running and maintaining aquariums, that I believe the conflict that zombies are fighting is not with the fish, though possibly with Meryl and the pets, but that the zombies' main conflict is actually out fighting with the aliens. Reason being, those two same things. The fact that the zombies are the ones creating and managing the aquariums, and that they're equipping people and fish with lasers, which are used to destroy aliens. And furthermore, that they have been slowly moving into genetic splicing to create their own zombie fish. Not fish that can infect other fish with zombie infection, but literal fish made out of zombies. The same zombie clones made by Zomboss, no doubt. But there is a problem with this, with the idea that zombies are allied or own or leaders of the fish right now, because why would the fish work with the zombies? I mean, I don't know how fish politics go on, but Stinky is clearly working with the plants, and none of the other pets are even mentioned, and clearly the fish and pets are considered a good faction, whereas the zombies are typically considered evil. Furthermore, it's not like the zombies immediately had zombie fish as in Plants vs. Zombies 1, it's literally just snorkel zombies. Garden Warfare, there's no aquariums that I could see, and the first instance of zombie fish is only after the zombies took over suburbia. So, even though the zombies might also dislike the aliens, or just because they want to eat Cyrax, whatever, the fish would have very valid reason to be cautious of them. However, what if the zombies had someone on the inside, and that they weren't working alone? What if they had someone ensuring that they would remain oppositional to the aliens? Someone who was helpful even though they looked rather strange on the surface. Someone with no explanation for their origin, and someone who can also be found inside of Zomboss's aquariums in numbers. I'm of course referring to Vert the Skeleton. The fish that swims around and just peacefully drops coins, completely unassumedly. It even says in his challenge mode story that Vert was never an undead product of a dark occult forces because he doesn't drop damaging items. Well, maybe that's because he's instead a product of undead cloning forces, and that his intentions here were very diplomatic. Because remember, there's absolutely no explanation why Vert is even here or doing this. We could extend it even more to Shrapnel, the robot fish that drops bombs instead of coins. Once again, no explanation to why he's here, and furthermore, his drops actually are dangerous. And I would be completely deceptive to not paying attention to the fact that the alien side also happens to have both a skeleton and a robot on their side as well. Remember how we mentioned Destructor the robot was a creation by a scientist for their nephew? Well, what if it was Zomboss's nephew? Or maybe Zomboss didn't create the bot himself, but rather assisted another scientist in creating it, knowing that it would go rogue. Bilateris is the outlier here, with the only one of these four being something that I think doesn't directly link back to Zomboss or zombies. In other words, I think either he's actually literally just an alien that happens to look like a skeleton, or maybe Cyrax can create undead too. That's an idea, but it would show consistency with his similarities to Zomboss. The point I'm getting at here is that I believe Zomboss had agents on both sides to more better facilitate Zomboss's takeover of the aquariums. Vert and Shrapnel serving as diplomats for the zombie side, whereas Bilateris and Destructor served as fear-mongering tactics to eventually push the fish and the aquariums more on the side of the zombies. After the Battle of Tank 5, I think the zombies probably ended up acquiring them passively due to support for them. And when they did, they declared war on the aliens again, this time going after straight for Cyrax's head. Stinky, Meryl, and the other pits, not aligned to the Zomboss, likely realized what was happening and fled, which all of a sudden makes more sense now, because Stinky already had a lucrative career under the sea, and Meryl is obviously a bit human-like, so she likely wouldn't trust the zombies either. But I have one more piece of evidence that not only the zombies fought a conflict with the aliens, but that they won, and they even took out Cyrax. Remember that train in Garden Warfare 1 with the Normandy on it? Well, there's something else on there, and let's see if you notice. See it? Let's try again. A massively large brain inside a dome-like jar. Now, ignoring the slight differences in design, which we can easily observe from Stinky the Snail, which I also use as a reference to Vert the Skeleton looking different, what are the possibilities that this brain belongs to anybody else other than Cyrax? This brain isn't just large, it's massive, human-like, and inside a giant glass dome. Who else in this entire series could fit that description other than Cyrax? I think with this brain in a dome, and that the zombies clearly have a vested interest in the sea and aquariums, that the zombies managed to defeat Cyrax and take his brain to do whatever Zomboss plans to do with it. And that is the full story of what happened to the aquariums under the sea after the Battle of Tank 5. The zombies slowly began infiltrating and taking over aquariums, making sure they had people on both sides ensuring that they would win. But why? I know I already answered this for why, because that's literally what the zombies do, eat brains. They want to eat the biggest and most brains, and Cyrax happens to have a pretty large brain himself, but I cannot scratch this idea that there is something more to this story I am missing. The similarities between Zomboss and Cyrax, and where did Meryl, the main character of all the fish and pets, go? Well, we aren't quite done with this theory yet, but maybe there's something else we could figure out. So, let's try and put the story of Cyrax on a timeline. We don't have objective proof for the exact dates, but we can assume some level of accuracy to them. Given one of the aliens, Gus's quote, that he heard a joke back in 1984, that is possibly the earliest that Cyrax could have arrived on Earth. But if the Battle of Insaniquariums took place on the Deluxe's release date, 2004, that means Cyrax would have been on Earth for at least 20 years, possibly more before the conclusion of Insaniquarium Tank 5. Though it could also be that Gus, like Destructor, isn't a true alien and instead was mutated or recruited by Cyrax. We move all the way up to 2004, where Cyrax is defeated and surrenders along with all aliens after Tank 5, and goes on to start a talk show. Sometime during the following 5 years, that peace was potentially violated and zombies came into possession of the previous tanks and became the head honchos of Aquarium ownership. By the time of the first Garden Warfare, that peace was 100% violated, as we know with Cyrax's brain being found on the train awaiting transit. We don't know if the zombies are on the ones transporting the brain on the transit, but since the peace with the aliens likely didn't last for anybody, that it could be either the zombies, the fish, or even the humans who are transporting this brain. Moving along the line to Garden Warfare 2, the zombies had taken an even stronger hold over the aquarium business, manufacturing their own lasers and even equipping their soldiers with it too. So, back to Garden Warfare 2 for possible origins of Cyrax, and looking through all of space, I was mostly disappointed. There was no sign of creatures like Cyrax, and for the most part, no signs of all that much alien activity anywhere. As a matter of fact, the closest thing I even found to an alien activity was this pamphlet asking for help with a giant space worm. There is a possibility that this could be an origin to Bilaterus, but annelids typically don't have bones and instead have more hydrostatic skeletons, which are usually a more soft bone. But then again, this isn't exactly a scientifically correct universe, so this actually could be Bilaterus's origin, harvesting the space worm's bones. However, the poster Zomboss has, Zomboss Industries, taking over the universe one planet at a time, and if there was any other proof that you needed that zombies are actually fighting space-based conflicts, what about that dead space flyer? The alien flower who, although I don't think is related to Cyrax, does happen to share a same eye type, and the space cadet in Battle of Naperville. So, yes, I am still likely right about Zomboss attacking in space, but what about the similarities between these two? Brainiacs, masterminds, big heads, clones, their main goals focus on consumption, their creation of clones and minions? What am I missing here? Well, let's take a look at all we know about Zomboss's origins. And you guessed it, we know virtually nothing about his origins. We know based on comics and the newspaper about the science fair that he aged normally and went to college and got a degree in thanatology, the study of death, and that he was born in the year of the naked mole rat, whatever that means. Some people believe him to be in his 70s, however, due to the newspaper and that he obviously looks more like a kid here, I believe that he is probably a relative age to Crazy Dave, who is believed to be 36. If we place that on the timeline in 2009, that would mean both Crazy Dave and Zomboss were born in the year 1973. That would mean that if Zomboss is related to Cyrax, that Cyrax would have had to have arrived on Earth in this year. And with that, I do have at least some level of certainty in regards to their origins. Yeah, there's moon sharks in the comics, as well as Crazy Dave referencing a potential alien invasion, but Cyrax and Zomboss are special. So here's my theory. Cyrax and Zomboss are related, but Zomboss isn't Cyrax's brother. Rather, he is one of Cyrax's creations, specifically being a mutated zombie that grew to have super intelligence. However, Cyrax, much like with the mini Cyraxes he tried to create, ended up trying to oppose him, so he stopped making them and did away with him. When he created Zomboss, Zomboss was probably just a baby, thus Cyrax was able to make Zomboss his sort of protege, not realizing that his super intelligence, even as a zombie, could become dangerous. This could also potentially still fall in line with him going to standard school and college, as if he is 36 in the event of Plants vs. Zombies, that would make him 31 during the Battle of Insaniquarium, likely being almost a decade since he graduated college, which he did only complete his degree in 2 years. It's a shame, and I can't be 100% certain about this with more concrete proof, but this theory fits. Nobody else in the entire history of this game has come up with a composite conclusion as to where Zomboss' super intelligence came from. This is why the alien in the background of Tank 5 resembles him. Zomboss and his alien intelligence embedded with a very similar nature to Cyrax, being to invade and conquer and to consume. With Cyrax wanting to consume fish and Zomboss wanting to consume brains, and since he had a craving for brains and Cyrax's minions had a history of trying to betray him, that would be the story of Cyrax and Zomboss. I think I've gone as far as I can, and this is the conclusion I came to, that Cyrax is a vast intelligence that came from another world, and in invoking his armies created Zomboss, who would go on to overtake him. And honestly, at this point, I could call the theory here, as we had figured out pretty much the entirety of the storyline of Insaniquarium aliens, the fish, the aquariums, and even linked the origins of Dr. Zomboss to it, and I was about to call it here. But then I remembered, who was my original lead for this theory? Stinky the Snail. Where is he now, and what happened to him and the other pets, most notably Meryl? Well, like with Zomboss and Cyrax, towards the end there will be no solid conclusion I could come to, but I just might have a theory. So back to Stinky, Meryl, and the pets, and once again I had nothing on Meryl. There is actually a reference to mermaid zombies, and that's the imp mermaids, but 3 things wrong with them being any modern evidence. First off, once again, this takes place in the past, meaning this is very likely before Meryl was even born. The imps are usually comically small and are generally ruled out, and lastly, I'm fairly certain these aren't even actually mermaids, and are instead just costumes. The main reason for that being that they still have both their legs and their tails when on land, but I could be wrong here. There's also the mermaid zombie Neptuna, which is a Plants vs. Zombies hero character, but I really don't think there's all too much here other than it could be seen as feasible proof that mermaids can also become zombies, or just be born as zombies. I don't think it's Meryl. Yeah, zombification might cause baldness sometimes, but the tail, the arm braces, and the bra are clearly different. Plus, her hair is an octopus, which is a creature that's excluded from the entire pets and fish catalog. Thus, although it might be a psycho squid for her hair, I doubt that this character is related to Meryl. Nevertheless, I was getting worried because it was looking like this case was about to run cold again, so I just started throwing out ideas for what might have happened to Meryl. There is a possibility that Meryl could have just died or moved on along with the other pets. We don't really see any references to any pets or any other fish in Zomboss's aquariums excepting the zombie fish, the vert skeletons, and the occasional squids and pufferfish, all of which are exempt from the pets, but all present in multiple of Zomboss's aquariums. The dolphin gun clearly isn't being made from the same porpoise species that the pet is from, so that's ruled out, nor are there any corpses or undead variants of these fish anywhere. Though there is some level of evidence in Garden Warfare 2 sewers to suggest that there is a bit of pollution. Plus the general toxic green aesthetic of Zombie Aquarium, there could be a very valid point that Meryl would probably, if she wasn't captured by Zomboss, would in one part largely want to protect the oceans by siding with the plants, as both the plants and Meryl seem to at least be in some part of forces of nature. But once again, we have no evidence of her in any other Plants vs. Zombies game, so that leaves her ultimate fate, whether she died, fled the area, got captured by Zomboss, or joined the plants in battle. Meryl's fate is largely unknown. So what about Stinky? Well, we know this wasn't the end of Stinky's career, as after Insaniquarium, he got a job at the Zen Garden, and then later in Garden Warfare 1 and 2, he became a cosmetic item for Pea Shooter, with the only other reference to snails in Garden Warfare being the Snail Delivery Company. Now, we can assume at this point in Stinky's life that he is likely pretty rich, both with his grind set being conceptualized as soon as he was first introduced, along with it being his main thing. Furthermore, he is featured with the golden snail shell in Wabby Waboo, meaning if he owns that shell and that video is canon, he can likely afford a similar amount of opulence and luxury as Crazy Dave, who owns an entire mansion. Thus, I believe I brought attention to this, but Stinky may very well own this entire moving company, which probably has made him all the more richer. He likely only returns as a cosmetic now because he probably has other business, and has long since ascended past just working at a Zen Garden or aquarium, and has likely employed other snails by then. And he may even be looking for something too while riding on a plant, with only the plants able to assure him proper security when he's searching. So here's my final theory, and like Cyrax, it is a bit of a leap of faith, but I do think it's possible. Stinky technically makes a return in Battle for Naperville, however, unlike Garden Warfare 1, 2, Plants vs. Zombies, or Insaniquarium, this Stinky doesn't look like the others. He has 4 eyes, a rather derpy smile, he has a bunch of rings around his neck, and his eyes, they even kind of resemble Cyrax's. And I know what we're all asking, what on earth happened to him? Though, I actually think this is a simpler solution. There's another cosmetic in Battle for Neighborville called Slimy the Slug, and it shares a similar appearance to this variant of Stinky, with the exception that it doesn't have a shell. Thus, I don't think this snail is actually Stinky at all, and rather it's another slug or snail that Stinky has employed, possibly also searching for something, or just trying to help out the plants by being a worthy helmet. But as to why Stinky is doing all of this, and what he might be looking for, might be clearer than we think. When Stinky was asked why he was so obsessed with money in his original description, he said because it impresses the ladies. And who is the most feminine, ladylike character of all the pets in Insaniquarium? Meryl the Mermaid. Thus, I think that although it's not what it was originally intended, I think Stinky is using his money to search through Zomboss's aquariums to see if he can find the other lost pets from his Insaniquarium days, and maybe buy them out and even get his own aquarium for them so they don't have to worry about zombie fish anymore. And I think Dave and the plants are more than willing to help them because Stinky is a financial ally, helps them with his moving company, is a good friend and a hard worker, and they would be more than willing to help out a friend who also has a bone to pick with the zombies, and that is the Stinky theory. And that is the Stinky theory. A story of the possible origin of the main antagonist of Plants vs. Zombies and the game that came before it very well possibly being a prequel, with a confirmed character in the world and real consequences that were happening to the planet too. A story that in some ways can even seem bittersweet or sad, as the aquariums we defended in our past only ended up decaying over time anyways, and we don't know what happened to any of the other pets or Meryl, as we never hear from or see them again, with our only conclusion to their true whereabouts being purely theoretical. But with Stinky the Snail being the sole survivor still present on the plant side, seemingly assisting them from the sidelines while he searches for his other friends, with the intent to save them if they need it. From here, I also wanted to comment on a possibility that maybe Dave knew Meryl through Stinky, and maybe the two liked each other or were even a couple at some point, but I couldn't find any evidence for this, with the only lead that I had being that he was looking for a romantic partner during the events of Garden Warfare 2. But all in all, I know that Replanted is going to be coming out soon, which will in all likelihood reintroduce Stinky, as well as a new aquatic garden. It might also even have some new insights for this theory, and it also could potentially debunk everything I've said. However, as sad as it is to say, I don't think the Plants vs. Zombies series is going to last much longer, due to failures of more recent titles, and the refusal to stop strangling the franchise with over-monetization. But I wanted people to know more about the true origins of where this game came from, and potentially uncover a whole new story that explained one of the biggest mysteries of the entire series. And we may not ever have any confirmation of the future, or of any of the pets. We might not even see Stinky again either. But if we do, we can say thanks for not giving up on his friends.